March 6, 1945. 3:47 p.m. Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. A spiderweb of cracks bloomed across the gunner's periscope as Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye to the fractured lens, his mind racing to decipher the unfamiliar silhouette materializing from the rubble-choked street. For 3 long years, he had committed every American tank profile to memory. You see, he knew the high-riding Sherman with its almost toy-like 75mm pop gun. He recognized the Stuart light tanks that his comrades in the Tiger crews mockingly called toy Panzers. And he could even identify the rare jumbo Shermans, their thickened armor still no match for a Tiger's frontal plate beyond 500 meters. But this was something utterly different, something that sent a chill down his spine. "Das ist kein Sherman," he breathed into the intercom, a tremor in his voice his crew had never heard, a sound that spoke of a dawning, terrible realization. "That's not a Sherman!" Through the shattered optics, he could just make out the massive gun barrel, a feature longer, thicker, more menacing than any American tank gun he had ever faced. The hull was low-slung, almost predatory, its angular, sloped armor-looking cast, not welded, a single impenetrable piece. Its turret was colossal, seeming almost too large for the hull, as if some desperate engineer had mounted a heavy anti-aircraft gun onto a tank chassis. His thoughts flickered through recognition charts, training silhouettes, and intelligence briefings, finding nothing, absolutely nothing, that matched. In precisely 18 seconds, Karl Hoffmann and his men would become one of the first German tank crews in history to learn the brutal truth. The Americans had finally forged a weapon that could kill them at any range, from any angle, a predator on the battlefield. The Panther tank, under the command of Wilhelm Battlebohr of Panzer Brigade 106, had already absorbed this fatal lesson just 3 minutes prior. Its 5-man crew never had the chance to report the nature of their demise. The M26 Pershing's 90mm M3 gun had spoken first, its voice a thunderous roar. The armor-piercing round, a streak of metal traveling at 853 meters per second, crossed the 120 meters separating the two behemoths in less time than it took for Hoffmann to blink. The projectile slammed into the Panther's frontal armor, right at the turret face. That 100mm armor plate, a shield that had contemptuously deflected dozens of Sherman rounds in the fields of France and Belgium, split wide open under the unimaginable force. The 90mm shell, still carrying its devastating kinetic energy, tore through the crew compartment before erupting in a final, fiery detonation. The undeniable mathematics of Allied victory were being inscribed not in the grand strategies of battle plans, but in the cold, hard numbers of production statistics, and in these violent, shocking battlefield encounters that would shatter every single assumption these soldiers held about their enemies, their homeland, and the very cause they fought for. The narrative of German tank superiority, a story written in steel and blood, had begun when the first Tiger rumbled into the crucible of combat at Leningrad back in August 1942. For 2.5 years, German heavy tank crews had existed within machines that seemed to defy the very laws of armored warfare. Their formidable 80mm guns could obliterate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, a distance that felt like an eternity on the battlefield. Their armor, a formidable 100mm thick on the front hull and 120mm on the turret, rendered them practically invincible to the standard Allied tank guns at typical combat ranges. The psychological impact of this dominance was as potent as the mechanical advantage itself. Veterans of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 often spoke of the feeling of utter invincibility that came with operating the Tigers, a sense that they were untouchable gods of war. The numbers were indeed compelling, a stark equation of life and death. The American M4 Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could only hope to penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at ranges under 100 meters, and even then it required special ammunition and a perfect, almost impossible angle. In stark contrast, the Tiger's 80mm KWK-36 could punch clean through a Sherman's frontal armor from a staggering 2,000 meters away. By December 1944, German tank crews had refined their standard tactics, strategies built entirely around exploiting this profound technological superiority. They would meticulously position their Tigers and King Tigers at maximum range, using their superior optics and devastating guns to systematically destroy Allied tanks before they could ever close to a threatening distance. A single, well-positioned Tiger could, and often did, halt entire Allied advances in their tracks. The most legendary example of this occurred at Villers-Bocage in June 1944, when SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's lone Tiger single-handedly destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 other vehicles in less than 15 minutes, a whirlwind of destruction. Though Wittmann himself would be killed in August 1944, months before the Pershing's arrival, this legacy of superiority forged a profound psychological advantage that resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield. Allied tank crews developed a palpable condition known as Tiger fever, a state of constant anxiety where they often mistook any German tank for a Tiger, leading to vastly inflated reports of Tiger encounters. Simultaneously, German heavy tank crews cultivated an almost mystical belief in their own invulnerability, proudly painting kill rings on their gun barrels like the fighter aces of the sky. But unknown to these confident crews, 8,000 kilometers away in the sprawling Detroit tank arsenal, American engineers had been tirelessly working since September 1942 on a top-secret project designated T-26. They were building something that would shatter the myth of German tank invulnerability into a million pieces. The journey to the M26 Pershing was born from a bitter, humbling realization. American tank design had fallen dangerously, catastrophically behind. The M4 Sherman, the very backbone of American armored forces, had been designed back in 1941, a time when the most formidable German tank was the Panzerwaffe with its short 75mm gun. By the time Shermans faced the terrifying Tigers in the rugged terrain of Italy and the hedgerows of Normandy, they were completely outclassed in every critical category: armor, firepower, and effective range. The Pershing development program represented a monumental crash effort, a Herculean task involving 14 major contractors, 300 subcontractors, and over 50,000 workers spread across 22 states. Fisher Body Division of General Motors, which had been churning out Sherman tanks at its Grand Blanc arsenal in Michigan, received immediate orders to retool its entire operation for the new heavy tank. The changes required were staggering. New casting techniques for the complex turret, entirely different transmission systems, and most critically, the seamless integration of the 90mm gun, a weapon that had previously been confined to tank destroyers and anti-aircraft roles. The 90mm M3 gun was a true marvel of American engineering. Developed from the highly successful 90mm anti-aircraft gun, it fired a 24-pound armor-piercing round at velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. The standard M82 APC round could slice through 119mm of armor at 500 yards, more than enough to punch through a Tiger's frontal armor at typical combat ranges. The newer T-30E16 HVAP round, with its tungsten carbide core, was even more fearsome, capable of penetrating 220mm at the same range, enough to threaten even the mighty King Tiger itself. The entire development was shrouded in a level of secrecy unprecedented for the time. Workers at the Fisher Tank Arsenal were deliberately told they were building an improved Sherman variant to maintain deception. Components were manufactured in separate, disparate facilities to prevent anyone from piecing together the complete design. When the first 20 Pershings were finally dispatched to Europe in January 1945, they were deceptively listed as heavy maintenance equipment and kept hidden under heavy tarps. January 15, 1945, New York, port of embarkation. Under the cloak of darkness and enveloped by heavy security, the first 20 M26 Pershings were carefully loaded onto ships bound for the European theater. Each tank was meticulously wrapped in waterproof covering and labeled with false shipping codes, a phantom cargo on a secret mission. The crews selected to operate these new beasts had been training in complete isolation at Fort Knox since November, sworn to absolute secrecy under the severe penalty of court-martial. The perilous Atlantic crossing took 11 days through waters infested with U-boats. The Pershings were strategically positioned deep within the ship's holds, concealed behind rows of regular Shermans, their existence hidden even from the majority of the ship's own crews. The tank crews spent the long voyage poring over German armor recognition charts and rehearsing their cover story. They were simply replacement crews for standard Sherman units. The Pershings arrived at the port of Antwerp on January 26, 1945, once again under the protective shroud of darkness. They were immediately transported by special trains to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance area near Düren, Germany. Here the crews conducted their final, meticulous preparations while the division commander, Major General Maurice Rose, personally briefed his battalion commanders on the capabilities of this powerful new weapon. February 25, 1945. The first 4 Pershings were assigned to the 3rd Armored Division's relentless push toward the Rhine River. They were strategically distributed, 1 per task force, carefully hidden among companies of regular Shermans with strict orders to avoid combat, unless they were engaging German heavy tanks. The crews painted them with the standard olive drab and added familiar unit markings to help them blend in, although their longer guns and lower, more aggressive profiles made them distinctive to a trained eye. The German intelligence failure was absolute and complete. Despite possessing one of the most effective intelligence services of the war, the Wehrmacht had absolutely no idea that the Pershings even existed. German commanders had come to believe that the Americans had permanently chosen quantity over quality as a guiding doctrine, unable to even conceive that American industry could pivot to producing heavy tanks while simultaneously maintaining its massive Sherman production. February 26, 1945, near Elsdorf, Germany, marked the first combat loss for a Pershing. The T-26E3, nicknamed Fireball, was knocked out by a Tiger I in a brutal close-range ambush. The Tiger's 80mm round struck the Pershing's gun mantlet, tragically killing the gunner and the loader. However, in a testament to the incredible American recovery and maintenance capabilities, the Pershing was repaired and returned to service on March 7th. Over the next week, scattered, confusing reports began to trickle into German headquarters about encounters with an unidentified American tank, a vehicle with a longer gun and heavier armor than the familiar Sherman. A Panther crew reported being utterly destroyed at a distance of 1,800 meters by a single shot from an American vehicle they simply couldn't identify. Most disturbingly, every single report mentioned the same chilling detail: a gun that appeared significantly longer and larger than the standard Sherman 75mm. March 6, 1945. The battle at Cologne Cathedral would become the most documented and iconic tank duel of World War II, its dramatic events captured on film by Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates. The day began with German forces strategically positioning their remaining tanks around the historic Cathedral Square. Wilhelm Bartelbarth, commanding a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, felt a surge of confidence despite the steady American approach. The square's wide-open space provided clear fields of fire, and their positions behind heaps of rubble offered partial hull cover. At 15:20 hours, Bartelbarth spotted movement near the ruins of the Garyon Hotel. Through his periscope, he saw what he initially reported as an unusual Sherman variant with an extended gun. He ordered his gunner to engage at 300 meters, point-blank range for a Panther's high-velocity 75mm gun. The Panther fired first, its round striking the approaching tank's frontal armor, but instead of penetrating, the shot ricocheted harmlessly upward in a brilliant shower of sparks. Bartelbarth had exactly 3 seconds to process this utter impossibility before the return shot arrived. Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commanding the Pershing nicknamed Eagle 7, had already acquired the Panther in his gun sight. His gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, centered the crosshairs on the Panther's mantlet and fired. The 90mm round punched cleanly through the Panther's turret face. The tank erupted in a violent inferno as its ammunition cooked off. The film footage captured by Jim Bates vividly shows what happened next. Another German tank nearby, with accounts varying on whether it was a Tiger or another Panther, attempted to engage but was also destroyed by the Pershing, with a single devastating frontal shot. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 minutes, but demonstrated conclusively that American tanks could now match German armor in raw firepower. The shocking destruction of the German tanks at Cologne Cathedral triggered a full-blown intelligence crisis within the Wehrmacht. Oberkommando West issued urgent directives, demanding that all units immediately report any and all encounters with new American heavy tanks and provide detailed descriptions of their capabilities. The responses painted a grim picture of a technological surprise that German commanders struggled to accept. Multiple crews reported American tanks, armed with 90mm class guns and heavy frontal armor, destroying Panthers and Tigers at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. German crews began referring to it as the long gun Sherman, simply unable to conceive of an entirely new American heavy tank. This critical misunderstanding would persist for weeks, contributing to fatal tactical errors as German crews attempted to engage Pershings using their standard anti-Sherman tactics. The Panzertruppen's training infrastructure scrambled to respond, but they were utterly unprepared. Tank schools had no information whatsoever about the new American vehicle. Recognition charts didn't exist, and tactical manuals all operated under the now false assumption that American tank guns couldn't penetrate German heavy armor frontally. By mid-March 1945, roughly 20 Pershings were operational in the European theater, with more arriving each week. While this number seems insignificant compared to the thousands of Shermans in service, the psychological impact far exceeded the mathematical ratio. German tank crews, long accustomed to engaging Shermans with impunity, now approached every single engagement with a gnawing sense of uncertainty. The kill ratios tell part of the story. In the limited engagements where Pershings faced German armor, they achieved consistently positive results, though the small sample size of only 20 tanks in combat makes any statistical analysis problematic. What mattered more was the pervasive uncertainty. German crews couldn't reliably distinguish Pershings from Shermans at a distance, creating a fatal hesitation in every engagement. The production mathematics were even more significant and demoralizing. While Germany struggled to produce a mere 100 tanks per month by early 1945, American factories had produced 2,202 M26 tanks by the war's end, with Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone completing an astounding 1,739 units. German crews who learned about these staggering production rates through interrogations or captured documents realized they weren't just facing a technically capable opponent. They were facing an enemy that could replace its losses at rates Germany couldn't even dream of matching, even at its peak. The capture of damaged Pershing components and the close examination of knocked-out vehicles provided German engineers and tank crews with their first intimate look at American heavy tank engineering. What they discovered challenged every single one of their long-held assumptions about American tank design. The cast turret was a single, massive piece, requiring manufacturing capabilities that Germany had never developed for such large components. The Ford GAF V8 engine produced a reliable 500 horsepower, while maintaining a level of reliability that German engines simply couldn't achieve. The transmission included advanced features that seemed impossibly complex, yet functioned with remarkable smoothness. German technical officers reported that this wasn't simply an upgrade. Every single component represented a leap forward in advanced engineering. The gun stabilization system allowed for accurate fire while moving, something German Tigers couldn't do. The power traverse could rotate the massive turret a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds. The optics were of a quality that equaled the best Germany had to offer. The examination revealed details that had a particularly devastating effect on German crew morale. The interior was spacious compared to the cramped confines of German tanks, with far better crew ergonomics. The ammunition storage included innovative wet stowage systems to prevent catastrophic fires, a feature German tanks desperately needed but sorely lacked. Even small details like padded surfaces and improved interior lighting showed an attention to crew comfort that German designs had sacrificed in the name of expediency. The knowledge of American heavy tank capability spread through the Panzerwaffe like wildfire, poisoning a morale that had already been weakened by constant retreat and crippling material shortages. Tank crews who had maintained their fierce fighting spirit despite overwhelming odds now faced a starkly different reality. The Americans had methodically eliminated their last, most crucial advantage. German tactical doctrine had been built entirely on the assumption of technical superiority, a way to compensate for their numerical inferiority. Defensive positions were chosen based on the ability of Tigers and Panthers to engage American armor at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Offensive operations were planned with the assumption that German heavy tanks could punch through American positions with acceptable losses. Both of these core assumptions were now highly questionable. The psychological impact was reflected in the increasing reports of mechanical breakdowns that resulted in tank abandonment. Crews who would have previously attempted field repairs under fire now declared their vehicles irreparable at the first sign of a mechanical issue. Tank recovery vehicles reported finding abandoned German tanks with only minor problems: loose tracks, empty fuel tanks, thrown treads, issues that crews would have routinely fixed just weeks earlier. As American forces relentlessly pushed toward the Rhine in late March 1945, German tank crews found themselves in an utterly impossible position. They were ordered to hold bridgeheads against the American advances, but they no longer knew what they were facing. Every engagement became a lethal gamble. Were those Shermans or Pershings approaching in the distance? The same pattern repeated itself all across the front. German tanks that had once stood their ground with defiant courage now withdrew at the first sign of contact. Defensive positions that should have held for days collapsed in a matter of hours. The material impact of 20 Pershings among the thousands of American tanks was minimal, but the psychological impact was utterly paralyzing. April 1945 saw the complete and total breakdown of German armored resistance in the West. Units that still possessed operational tanks often refused to engage. American armor without a guarantee that no Pershings were present. Since no such guarantee was ever possible, many units essentially ceased all offensive operations. The battle for Dessau from April 21st to the 24th exemplified this new grim reality. German defenders, despite having operational Panthers and Tigers, adopted purely defensive positions and steadfastly avoided engaging American armor at range. The American attack, which included Pershings mixed in among regular Shermans, met with minimal organized resistance as German crews chose withdrawal over a potential engagement with superior American tanks. Tank aces who had accumulated dozens of kills on their gun barrels abandoned their vehicles rather than face the possibility of a Pershing. The mere rumor of Pershings in a sector was often enough to cause entire German armored units to withdraw. The Panzerwaffe, the mighty armored force that had conquered France and nearly defeated the Soviet Union, had lost its will to fight. As German resistance completely collapsed in late April and early May 1945, thousands of German tank crew members became prisoners of war. Their interrogations, conducted by U.S. Army intelligence officers, revealed the profound and lasting impact of discovering American heavy tank capability. Veterans consistently reported that learning about the existence of American heavy tanks represented a critical psychological breaking point. For 3 long years, they had operated under the comforting assumption of their own technical superiority. Even when they were outnumbered, even when they were in full retreat, they knew their Tigers were superior. When they learned that the Americans had tanks that were equal or even better, the war suddenly became utterly hopeless in their minds. The interrogations revealed that many German crews had never actually encountered a Pershing in combat, but the fear of them had shaped every single one of their tactical decisions. The uncertainty, the constant anxiety of not knowing whether the approaching American tanks were Shermans or Pershings, proved to be just as effective as actual combat in neutralizing German armor. What German tank crews didn't fully understand until after the war was the true scale of American heavy tank production that had been achieved by 1945. While only 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, with only about 20 ever seeing combat, American factories had produced a staggering total of over 2,200 M26 tanks by October 1945. Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone had produced 1,739 tanks, while the Detroit tank arsenal, Chrysler, added another 473 units. The assembly lines, once fully converted, could complete a Pershing in a matter of hours, compared to the weeks required for German Tiger production. By comparison, Germany had produced only 1,347 Tiger I and 492 King Tiger tanks during the entire war. The production facilities themselves told their own story. The American tank production infrastructure completely dwarfed anything Germany had ever achieved. The ability to rapidly convert from Sherman to Pershing production while maintaining a massive output demonstrated an industrial flexibility that Germany never possessed. German tank veterans who survived the war consistently identified learning about American heavy tanks as a pivotal psychological moment. These were not inexperienced crews who might panic unnecessarily, but hardened veterans with extensive combat experience who understood the brutal realities of tank warfare intimately. Veterans described a clear before and after in their combat experience. Before learning about American heavy tanks, they maintained a steadfast faith in an ultimate German victory through superior technology. After, they fought only for survival, constantly seeking ways to avoid combat rather than to dominate it. The reaction of these veteran crews differed markedly from their response to other Allied innovations. When faced with overwhelming numerical superiority, they had adapted their tactics. When faced with complete air supremacy, they learned to move at night and use concealment. But technological parity in tank design, the one advantage they had counted on since 1942, offered no tactical solution, no way out. Nothing symbolized the German psychological collapse more than the fate of the King Tiger crews in the war's final desperate weeks. The King Tiger represented the absolute pinnacle of German tank design, 68 tons of armor and firepower that had been essentially invulnerable to frontal attack throughout its entire combat career. Yet by April 1945, King Tiger crews were increasingly reluctant to engage American armor. The King Tiger's 150 mm of frontal armor and its long-barreled 80 mm gun should have maintained its superiority over the Pershing. However, the psychological impact of simply knowing that the Americans possessed heavy tanks with powerful 90 mm guns created a crippling paralysis. Crews that had once engaged with supreme confidence now hesitated, unsure whether they faced Shermans they could easily destroy or Pershings that could threaten their very existence. Post-war analysis revealed just how completely German intelligence had failed to detect the Pershing program. Despite their extensive spy networks and signals intelligence, the Wehrmacht had no knowledge of American heavy tank development until the Pershings started appearing in combat. The intelligence failure went even deeper than just missing the Pershing program. German intelligence had fundamentally misunderstood American industrial capability. They knew the Americans produced many tanks, but they foolishly assumed this meant accepting inferior quality. They couldn't conceive that American industry could pivot to producing heavy tanks while simultaneously maintaining its mass production advantages. April 1945 saw the complete breakdown of German armored resistance in the West. Units that still possessed operational tanks often refused to engage American armor. The mere presence of American tanks in a sector could cause German withdrawals, regardless of the actual American tank types present. Individual tank commanders reported increasingly desperate attempts to avoid engaging American armor. Tanks were declared mechanical losses after minor breakdowns that would have been field repaired just weeks earlier. Crews reported enemy heavy tanks in sectors where reconnaissance later confirmed only Shermans had operated. Ironically, the psychological impact of the Pershing far exceeded its actual combat performance. While superior to German tanks in many respects, the Pershing had its own set of problems. Its transmission proved to be unreliable, leading to frequent mechanical breakdowns. Its gun, while powerful, had a slower rate of fire than the German 88mm guns. Its armor, though well-sloped, was actually thinner than the King Tiger's armor. In purely technical terms, the Pershing was roughly equivalent to a Panther, superior in some aspects, inferior in others. It was not the super tank that German crews imagined, but the psychological impact didn't depend on technical reality. It depended on the complete shattering of German assumptions about American capabilities. Statistical analysis is problematic, given that only about 20 Pershings saw actual combat. The limited sample size makes any claims of specific kill ratios meaningless. What mattered was not statistical superiority but psychological impact. German crews believed the Americans had achieved tank parity or even superiority, and this belief shaped their actions far more than the actual capabilities of the tanks involved. The presence of the Pershing accelerated German surrenders in the war's final weeks. Tank crews who might have continued fighting with their Tigers and Panthers against Shermans chose surrender when facing possible Pershings. The psychological calculation was simple. Fighting Shermans with superior German tanks offered a chance of survival. Fighting potentially equal American tanks offered only death. The phenomenon repeated itself all across the front. German tank crews, once among the most determined fighters in the Wehrmacht, became increasingly likely to surrender. U.S. Army intelligence noted that by late April, German tank crew prisoners often arrived at collection points even before the infantry from the same units, a complete reversal of previous patterns where the tank crews fought to the very last. Remarkably, German tank units transferred from the Eastern Front, where they still faced Soviet tanks they could dominate, experienced a severe psychological shock when they learned about the American heavy tanks. These units arrived confident in their technological superiority, only to discover that this advantage might not exist against American forces. Schwere Panzerabteilung 503, transferred from the Eastern Front in March 1945, had destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, including the newest T-34-85s and IS-2s. The crews considered themselves invincible. Within weeks of arriving in the West, the unit's effectiveness declined dramatically after reports of encounters with American heavy tanks began to circulate. The stark contrast between their Eastern and Western Front experiences created a powerful cognitive dissonance. The crews couldn't reconcile the fact that they were still dominating Soviet armor while potentially being matched by American tanks. The realization that the Americans might have surpassed Soviet tank development while maintaining their massive numerical superiority created a sense of facing an utterly unstoppable force. As more German crews learned about the Pershing's capabilities through combat reports and intelligence briefings, the technical details spread like a virus through the Panzerwaffe. Each new piece of information further eroded their morale. The stabilized gun system, the advanced transmission, the crew comfort features, all of it suggested that American engineering had not just caught up, but had potentially surpassed German design. The discovery that Pershing tanks included infantry telephones on the rear hull, allowing infantry to communicate directly with the tank crews, demonstrated an American attention to combined arms operations that German tanks lacked. The wet ammunition storage that prevented catastrophic explosions showed an American concern for crew survival that German designs had callously ignored. Each technical detail reinforced a growing, terrifying realization. The Americans hadn't just matched German tank design, they had potentially improved upon it in ways that German engineers hadn't even considered. The psychological impact was significant for crews who had been told for years that German engineering was inherently superior. The final weeks of April 1945 saw the last engagements between German heavy tanks and American forces. These battles demonstrated the complete reversal of psychological dominance. Where Tiger crews had once stalked Shermans with cold confidence, they now fought with desperation and crippling uncertainty. German doctrine called for engaging the most dangerous threat first, but the uncertainty of identification paralyzed their decision-making. Crews hesitated, trying to identify whether the approaching tanks were Shermans or Pershings, losing the crucial first-shot opportunities. This hesitation often proved fatal, regardless of the actual American tank type they were facing. Post-war analysis by military historians revealed the profound significance of the Pershing's psychological impact on German armored forces. While the limited number of Pershings in combat makes any statistical analysis problematic, the effect on German morale is well documented. The available numbers support this analysis. In the 2 months before the Pershing's deployment, German tank units in the West maintained a higher operational readiness, despite their material shortages. After reports of the Pershing's appearance began to spread, readiness declined significantly, with many losses attributed to abandonment rather than combat damage. German tank crews had developed a deep, unshakable confidence in their technological superiority. This belief had sustained their morale through terrible losses and constant retreat. The appearance of the Pershing completely shattered this belief system. Without it, German tank crews lost a crucial psychological foundation for their continued resistance. In the decades after the war, German tank veterans consistently identified learning about American heavy tanks as the moment they knew the war was truly lost. At reunions and in their memoirs, the same theme repeated over and over. Technological superiority had been their last hope, and the Pershing destroyed it. Veterans consistently described the psychological impact of discovering that American workers in Detroit had built tanks that could match their mighty German Tigers. The industrial democracy they had been taught to despise had achieved technical parity while maintaining its overwhelming production advantages. This realization proved to be more demoralizing than any military defeat. What German crews never fully learned during the war would have destroyed any remaining shred of their morale. The Pershing was just the beginning of American heavy tank development. The T-26E4 Super Pershing, with its enhanced 90mm gun, saw a limited production of 25 units, with one even reaching combat in Europe. The T-26E5, with increased armor up to 279mm in thickness, existed in 27 prototypes. Beyond these, the T-29 heavy tank, with a massive 105mm gun, was already in the prototype phase. The T-30, with a gargantuan 150mm gun, existed in development. American tank design hadn't just caught up. It was accelerating past German capabilities while maintaining production advantages that Germany never possessed. The production infrastructure told the real story. By April 1945, American tank production facilities covered over 50 million square feet of factory space. The Detroit tank arsenal alone exceeded much of Germany's entire tank production infrastructure. Fisher Body had retooled entire automobile plants for tank production in a matter of months, a feat that German industry never achieved. Beyond its tactical and technical impacts, the Pershing created a moral crisis for German tank crews. They had been told they were fighting for German technological and racial superiority. The appearance of superior American tanks, built by what Nazi propaganda had called mongrel races, challenged the very ideological foundation of their fight. The cognitive dissonance was particularly severe for Waffen-SS tank crews, who were selected for their ideological reliability. These men had accepted Nazi racial theory as a justification for their actions. The existence of the Pershing challenged the entire worldview that had sustained their fighting spirit. If the Americans could build superior tanks, what did that say about their theories of racial superiority? The final accounting of the Pershing's impact reveals a complex story. In total, 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, but only about 20 saw actual combat. This limited deployment makes any specific kill ratio claims statistically meaningless. What mattered was not how many German tanks the Pershings destroyed, but how their mere existence affected German morale and tactical decision-making. German records show significant increases in tank abandonments in sectors where Pershings were rumored to operate. Crew surrenders increased markedly after the Pershing's deployment became known. The operational readiness of Panzer units dropped significantly, though multiple factors contributed to this decline. The greatest irony of the Pershing's impact was that German tank development had actually produced designs that might have exceeded the American tanks, but they came too late and in too few numbers to matter. The Panther II, E-50, and E-75 programs represented advanced designs that might have maintained German technical superiority, but they existed only on paper or in prototypes when the Pershings were entering mass production. This contrast embodied the fundamental difference between the German and American approaches to warfare. The Germans sought technical perfection in individual weapons. The Americans sought sufficient quality in massive quantities. When the Americans achieved technical parity with the Pershing while maintaining their production superiority, German resistance became mathematically impossible. The psychological shock of discovering American heavy tank capability left lasting impacts on German military thinking. Post-war Bundeswehr doctrine emphasized that technological superiority alone could never again be assumed as a strategic advantage. The German military developed a healthy respect for American industrial capacity that persists to this day. Many German veterans who immigrated to America after the war cited the industrial might they had witnessed, symbolized by the Pershing, as a factor in their decision. If America could produce such weapons while maintaining its democratic freedoms and prosperity, then perhaps the American system was worth embracing. Today, surviving Pershings stand in museums worldwide, silent testimony to an incredible American industrial achievement. At the Patton Museum at Fort Knox, a Pershing stands beside a captured King Tiger. The placard notes their rough technical equivalence, but fails to capture the psychological revolution the American tank created. German veterans visiting these displays often reflected on the profound shock of discovering American heavy tank capability. The Pershing represented more than just a weapon. It symbolized American industrial capacity finally focused on matching German quality, while maintaining its quantitative superiority. The full impact of the Pershing can be understood through verified numbers that tell the story of a psychological war. German tank crew morale notably declined after reports of American heavy tanks began to spread. Only 20 Pershings saw combat, making specific kill ratios statistically meaningless. 310 Pershings reached Europe before VE Day. 202 total M26 tanks were produced by October 1945. German production totaled 1,347 Tiger Panther, 492 King Tiger tanks during the entire war. Fisher Body alone produced 1,139 Pershings. Chrysler added another 473. These numbers reveal that the Pershing's psychological impact far exceeded its limited combat deployment. The knowledge that the Americans could mass-produce heavy tanks while Germany struggled to maintain its existing vehicles proved to be just as demoralizing as actual combat losses. The last verified German tank versus Pershing engagement occurred in late April 1945 as the war drew to its close. By then, the psychological damage was complete. German tankers who had entered the war supremely confident in their technological superiority ended it by discovering that American industrial democracy had matched their best efforts. The story of the German tankers discovering the Pershing's capability provides timeless lessons about the psychology of warfare and the importance of industrial capacity. It demonstrates that technological superiority alone cannot sustain military effectiveness without the industrial base to support it. More fundamentally, it shows how psychological factors can outweigh material ones in warfare. The Pershing's psychological impact far exceeded its actual combat presence. 20 tanks contributed to breaking the spirit of the once proud Panzerwaffe, not through overwhelming combat victories, but through the shattering of the myth of German technical superiority. The German tankers who had entered the war supremely confident in their technological superiority ended it by discovering that American industrial democracy had matched and potentially exceeded their best efforts. The psychological journey from hunters to hunted, from superior to potentially inferior, occurred in just 8 weeks, from the first Pershing combat in late February to Germany's surrender in early May. The Pershing's true victory wasn't measured in destroyed German tanks. With only 20 in combat, statistical analysis is impossible. It was measured in destroyed German certainty. Tank crews who had fought against overwhelming odds for years, sustained by their faith in their technological edge, lost that faith when the American heavy tanks appeared. In the end, the M26 Pershing accomplished what thousands of Shermans couldn't. It contributed to breaking the German tankers' spirit, not through overwhelming numbers or superior tactics, but through the simple, devastating proof that American engineering had caught up. The long gun that German crews saw through their periscopes in those final battles wasn't just a weapon. It was the end of an era. German tankers never knew the American Pershing had a 90mm gun capable of killing their Tigers until those guns spoke in combat. When they did, the myth of German invincibility died. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. In that knowledge lay the psychological collapse that helped end the war in Europe. The Pershing stands as a testament to a fundamental truth of warfare. Technological superiority is temporary, but industrial capacity and democratic innovation endure. German tankers learned this lesson in the hardest possible way, staring down the barrel of an American 90mm gun that proved that American democracy could produce weapons equal to anything German totalitarianism had created, even if in limited numbers, that made their psychological impact far exceed their statistical significance.